Welcome to Spectral Shadows. This is the place where the stories don't just haunt your mind, they follow you into the dark. Before the whispers begin, tell me, where are you watching from and what time is it? Midnight? Or closer to the hour when shadows move on their own? If you're brave enough to continue, prove it. Like this video, subscribe to Spectral Shadows, and leave a comment with your time and location, so we'll know exactly where to find you. Now, let's open the door to tonight's nightmare. Story number 1. Something like over 1,100 folks go missing each year in our national parks. That's what? A chance you'll be hit by lightning while your plane goes down. I was willing to take those odds, but after what I witnessed in those mountains, I am telling you, the reality isn't worth that risk. I can hardly close my eyes to sleep these days, let alone stand being in the dark as I type this. It's like that thing is still looking for, hunting me. I don't feel safe, even at this piece of shit roadside motel. Where do I even begin with this one? I mean, you hear about these things in online message boards. Someone's so-and-so's friend or a cousin smells some ungodly musk while camping, or there is an unexplained trail closure due to a bear attack. Backpackers, we brush those things aside. Nothing can keep us from stretching our legs in some of the most remote places this country has to offer. We know we share that wilderness with animals, but nothing like this. This trip was all planned out. Well, sort of. I had an idea of where I wanted to go, but in typical fashion I had slept in and was late lining up for the walk-up permits. No campsites were available, and I couldn't exactly detour around the park. This trip was all about putting the steps in. The miles, one foot after another for an uninterrupted footpath through the Pacific Northwest. A day hike, then. That's what I promised the ranger. As skeptical as she looked, I think she felt sorry for me, eyeing the pack on my back and the dirt and grime I was caked in. It wouldn't hurt to let me have one night off the books, would it? So on I went, down that godforsaken trail that just hours before promised gnarly climbs, stellar vistas, and roaring waterfalls with brisk lakes I could shed my clothes and leap into at my heart's content. The sun was only in the sky for a few hours by the time I began feeling off. Like the birds chirping were missing their melodies, and even the flying insects were erratic. It was like someone was coaxing them along, saying, "Act normal so nobody suspects." Nature isn't supposed to feel like this. It's supposed to feel, natural. Even the lighting was off. Like everything was bathed in the type of light that only happens during an eclipse. A bizarre, silver-toned high noon. Everything around me was steeped in that oppressive eeriness, like I wasn't meant to be seeing the woods like this. Normally I would hike until dusk, but something in me told me to hunker down and get out of sight. Not only because I was planning to camp illegally in this park, but it was almost like the birds and the bugs were offering a warning. God, I just wish I saw it for what it was, and turned around, swallowed my pride, and tried again the next day. Fighting every instinct I had, I stepped off of the trail into the woods to my left. Without a permit, I wasn't supposed to be staying overnight outside an established campground. Stealth camping was my only option. It isn't just camping out of bounds. Getting caught carries consequences. I had to camp where I was hidden, somewhere nobody could find without turning over a rock or two. There were a couple of campsites nearby, but nothing near enough for me to draw attention. It only took like 200 meters before I came into a clearing. The setting sun and cooling temperature made each sunbeam visible through the light mist, now gathering in the canopy of trees. The smell of undisturbed soil, the barely there sound of the breeze through the leaves. That spot was perfect. I walked the perimeter of the clearing, staking out any spots to take. and had settled on a cluster of downed trees draped across one another. Setting up a tent was too risky. Too many other campers were around, and they would surely narc on me to the rangers. I threw my gear in the hollow, laid out my sleeping pad, and began my nightly routine. The sun sets fast in the woods. Unexpectedly fast sometimes. Being alone, there wasn't much keeping me up, so I crawled inside my refuge from the night and began piling some fallen leaves and other debris at the entrance of my shelter. I think that's what kept me alive. The silence that night was palpable. No insects, no rustling of critters, nothing. It was like the trees themselves wanted to hide from the darkness. In my years of camping in the backcountry, I have only experienced that silence maybe once. It puts you on edge. Every leaf falling to the earth rattles you, as if they announced your presence to whatever is around. Listening. I wish that silence lasted longer. A frantic stumble through the undergrowth is what roused me from my sleeping bag at first. Then the cries for help, and they were coming right towards me. I had poked my head out of my sleeping bag, trembling in paralyzed fear. Thoughts racing about whatever danger was barreling towards me. A young woman broke into the clearing, frantically looking back over her shoulder as she tripped and fell to the ground. She had looked like the forest itself was owed a pound of flesh. Her hair was long and tangled. Twigs and other debris jutted out from what I could assume was a neat ponytail at the start of the day. Claw marks littered her skin, each more violent and animalistic than the last. The once running blood now caked with dirt and sweat. Tears were streaming down her face, and only the look of abject horror was frozen into her features. That's about all I could make out in the moonlight. She was being chased. No, hunted. Saying it was a chase makes it seem like there was hope of a different outcome, or even fair odds. The smell announced its presence before the lumbering footsteps, like rotting eggs and a road-killed skunk left in the sun for a few days. It encroached upon my once serene hollow with violence and disrespect. I had to bury my face into the soil to keep myself from gagging. Her screams had risen into full-blown hysterics as this thing loomed towards her. Her scrambling backwards created little difference in the gap that creature was rapidly closing. Its movements were so effortless, nearly silent, as if the beast wasn't bigger than any grizzly I've ever seen. The claws on its feet carved deep grooves into the moss-covered floor, and its arms were so long they nearly dragged behind it, almost how you'd expect an orangutan or a gorilla to walk. I wish I could say I was the hero that saved the day, the man who triumphantly rose from his hideaway to scare the beast off the damsel in distress. But I wasn't. I cowered, doing everything in my power to keep from shaking in terror. Silently, I moved as much dirt, rotting branches, decayed leaves, and Lord knows what else onto my body and gear to hide myself. Stay hidden. I couldn't move an inch. Even a twitch of a muscle felt like an invitation for attention. Cocooned by decay and soil, all I could do was watch. The beast was upon her now, standing over her as she wept and begged for help that was never going to come. The hulking mass of fur reached out with arms that once dragged at its sides towards the poor woman's neck. Claws blackened, with viscera and dirt slowly dug into her windpipe as her shrieks slowly subsided into nothing but a whimper. Its maw expectantly opened as a roar that shook the earth echoed through the clearing, bloodied saliva dripping over its prey. The sound of it clamping onto her flesh is one that will never leave my nightmares. The effortlessness of the tearing of flesh, the stomach-lurching scent of her coppery blood filling the air, the sounds of the beast feasting on her flesh, her cries as she was eaten alive. It wasn't until the wind shifted that the creature lost interest in its meal. It looked right past my little hollow, the hollow I had already half buried myself into. Like an open invitation, into an early grave. Its muzzle turned towards the sky as it started to sniff the air. It could smell me, I swear it. The few steps it took towards my direction were agonizing and deliberate, like how your older brother would approach the closet you sought refuge in during hide and seek. I couldn't look anymore. I closed my eyes tight and waited for the inevitable, but it never came. All night I spent with my eyes welded shut, with only the sound of teeth tearing into flesh filling the woods. Oh God, the stench. I stayed there, motionless for what felt like days. Even after the beast had moved on, I dared not. Hunger and paranoia got the better of me, and I hightailed it out of there once the sun was in the sky long enough. I was bloodied and bruised, sprinting back through the woods, out of that godforsaken clearing, and back to the trail, screaming the whole damn way back to the ranger's station. Emergency vehicles were already on site by the time I had arrived. They had received word that a camper had gone missing from Site C the night prior. A young woman. I explained everything I saw to search and rescue down the damn clearing. I was met with incredulous glances and stifled guffaws. I suppose I couldn't blame them. I looked like I had taken a literal dirt nap, but they just took my statement as if it were business as usual. The ranger who checked me in the day prior didn't even flinch, almost like they knew her fate before I collapsed on that stupid gravel drive. Just another missing persons flyer around the local towns. That brings me to this evening, 3 days later, sitting here typing this on those same message boards we are told to ignore. The message boards that claim the sights and scents of the forest are just our imaginations. I don't think I actually hid from that beast that night. I only bought some time. The smell is only getting stronger, and no matter where I go, it follows. I bet it caught a whiff of me and let me go. To anybody that will listen, the smell of rotting eggs is seeping through every roadside motel I stay at. The very same smell countless backpackers and backcountry campers have sworn up and down belong to something out there in those damn woods. It exists, whatever it is. The park system is hiding something from us. I can't risk it following me out of these woods, but please, don't be the hero. Hide. Story number 2. My teenage years were a mess. My mom and dad went through a bad divorce, and they were trying to figure out 2 brand new lives. I ended up somewhere in between as I adjusted to an irregular schedule and a sudden move. When my mom got full custody, I was in my last year of high school. We'd just moved a year prior, and now we were about to move again. Just 6 months from graduation, we moved all the way to San Antonio. Quite a different vibe from a no-one-cares kind of town in Minnesota. So yeah, I graduated at the turn of the millennium, class of 2000. If I'm honest, I rarely think about that year when I lived in Minnesota. I mean, I remember it, but I'd be hard-pressed to tell you anything about it. I remember high school and how I thought it was weird they could afford a pool. I remember the Babin siblings being creeps, or that one Christian girl who couldn't stop talking about how she was saving herself for someone special. There was the guy who stayed in the computer hall all day, and the gym bro, and the guy who kept getting shoved into lockers. People called him Handsome Man, as a cruel mockery. I think my favorite was a guy named Hank. His dad was a plumber, and he was going to be a plumber too. Hank was the kind of guy who liked collecting things. Weird things, like lost screws, pop tabs, or bottle caps. He would categorize them by color or weight, and keep them in little jars in his locker. The one time I saw it, he had like 30 jars, all meticulously sorted. That's the one guy I guess I could call a friend from back then. He was going to be a plumber, and I was going to be a veterinarian. I reached my goal, but I have no idea if Hank ever did. I haven't thought about those days in Tomskog High in a while. I've had no reason to, really. That is, until not too long ago. Nowadays, I live out in Kerrville. I got a wife, 2 kids, 2 cars, and a very pampered golden retriever. Being a veterinarian, we've saved a lot on bills for that pup. My kids are about the same age that I was when things went to shit. But I'm glad to say that cycle is broken. I'm happily married. We've had a few hiccups along the way, but it's been more like sleep on the couch kind of hiccups, not the get out of my life kind. In this kind of life, you don't need to think back on your teenage years. You're busy worrying about your kids' college applications and tuition, or that weird sound you hear when you take a sudden right with your car, or why your favorite shirt is starting to feel too tight. My hair's gone a little too thin, my eyes are a little darker, and I have a harder time staying awake during movie night. But that's all just flavor, you know? It's all just life, a whole bunch of little worries. So when I had a couple of strangers come knock on my door, I didn't think much of it. I was home alone on a Sunday. I'd just walked Kitten, yes, the dog is named Kitten, and was about to settle down for lunch when there was a knock at the door. A white van with the logo of a wrench, a cogwheel, and a couple of pipes. Very generic. I opened the door to see 2 men in orange coveralls and full tool belts. They introduced themselves with a company name I didn't recognize. They asked me about my name, and I confirmed my identity. The city is taking steps to minimize damage from flash flooding, one of them explained. We're doing some groundwork, looking at possible run-throughs. Since you live at the end of the block, chances are we're going to have to go all around your property. So what are we looking at? I asked. 2, maybe 3 months of road work, a stone's toss away from your bedroom window. He continued, unless we can work something out and go straight through your backyard. Then we're looking at a month, tops. I think I'd be entitled to some compensation then, and I'd have to talk to my wife about it. Of course. Yeah. He nodded. Come along. I'll show you what we're working with. I stepped out of the house looking back at Kitten. He wasn't happy about it, tail between his legs and all. I closed the door and followed the men to the van. The moment they opened the side door, I was confused. There were no pipes, no tools, nothing. It was a blacked-out storage with soundproofed walls. One of them pulled a hood over my head. The other tased me. It felt like they'd tied all my nerves to a single spot and were trying to rip them out of my skin. They must have practiced this 100 times. It was so fast. Just a couple of seconds. Then I was face down in the back of a van with my legs and hands zip-tied. One of them stayed in the back, while the other sped off. A couple of streets later, they stopped. They did something to the side of the van, presumably changing or removing the logo, as well as changing the license plate. Meanwhile, the guy in the back wrapped me up in some kind of plastic. The best thing you can do is be quiet and still, he explained. Are we going to have a problem? I remember trying to ask 100 questions at once. There was no reason this should happen to me. I wasn't involved in anything sketchy, and we didn't have millions stashed away in some Looney Tunes kind of safe in my wife's home office. They hadn't even checked my wallet for cash. They just took my cell phone. I finally managed to get a question out. What do you want? I'll be honest, he said. I have no idea. We drove for a couple of hours. They sat me up and chained me to the wall. I was given some apple juice through a straw. For some reason, they treated me like I was dangerous. They would shy away from me whenever I moved. I could hear their tools rattling as if they were prepared to tase me if I said something. They didn't like, you lose a sense of time when you're wearing a bag over your head and your heart beats at 150 Mespol, but eventually they stopped the van. We were somewhere far out. The road had felt uneven, and I could hear birds chirping. A light shone through my bag as they opened one of the side doors and got into a heated conversation. How can this be the guy? The driver said. He's not trying anything. We've seen nothing. He's on the list. It's best not to question it. But what if we got it wrong? You saw what it took to dredge the fucking melonhead out of the lake. That tickled something in my brain. I hadn't heard that nickname in years. There was this one guy who used to stay in the gym a lot. He had a rounder kind of head than most people, not like misshapen or anything, just unusual by comparison. He liked the nickname, though. He thought Melonhead meant he had a big brain. I could still imagine him doing lifts, saying more, more, more between each rep. But that's when it first hit me. They were talking about my class that one year back in Minnesota. This had something to do with my high school years. I was only there for a couple of months. I said out loud, "We had to move." "What?" The guy in the back stepped back in and leaned down to me. I explained, at length, how my mother had moved to Minnesota on a whim, and how we'd left well before graduation. "So you never got the shots? Nothing? What are you talking about?" I could hear hesitation in his voice. Someone had messed up somewhere down the line. The two of them stepped away. "Look," the driver said, "we can either be the ones who took some initiative and disobeyed a direct order, or we can do what we're told. So we're going to stick him in the pods with those things. You want to risk it? I mean, even if we're right, do you want to take the risk of showing them we're willing to disobey an order?" That shut down the conversation. Mistake or not, they weren't about to turn back. They drove all night. I was given some kind of fruit sauce from a tube as a meal. By morning, we'd pulled up to an industrial complex. I could hear the machinery and power tools going off as metal struck metal. There were people there too, dozens of them. The moment we stepped out of the van, someone bumped into us. It was clear that wherever we were, they were in on it. I was led into a quieter room in the back and asked to step inside what felt like a locker. Rubber floor and walls, barely big enough for my shoulders to fit. They strapped me in, allowing me to effectively sit in there. But there was just no way to get comfortable. Then they tipped the entire thing, making me feel like I was lying in a coffin. It was completely soundproof and dark. A voice came through from an internal speaker. "We're releasing the straps in a moment," it said. "Then you can take off your hood. It's going to be a long ride. Try to get some sleep." "How long?" I asked. "Where are we going?" There was no answer. The straps came undone with a click, and I threw off my hood. It was pitch black. I barely knew if my eyes were open or not. Blinking was just a reflex. The air was stale, as a small fan spun somewhere around the top of my head. I could barely move, and I felt this heaviness in my chest, like if I somehow drew too deep a breath, the air would run out, or my rib cage would bump against the lid. It was so disorienting. I remember banging on what I thought was a door. I needed a light, a window, something to orient myself around, but there was no response. I didn't even know if they were still out there. What would I do if I got left in there? What if they just walked away? I tried telling myself it was going to be a long ride, but I had no idea. It wasn't just a long ride. It was close to torture. I was flipped, stacked, pushed, and at one point, dropped in free fall. The pod cushioned all blows, and since I could barely move, I couldn't really hurt myself from being in an unfortunate stance. It was clever, but man, was it uncomfortable. I lost all sense of time there. It might have been a couple of hours. It could have been a whole day. They had this little hatch on the side where they got me a bottle of water or a tube of fruit sauce. I had 2 more meals, so I'm thinking it all took about a day. I know there was a flight involved, though. My ears popped. I was half asleep the next time they used the speaker. "We'll be opening the doors in 10 seconds, a strange voice said. "Make no sudden movements." I counted in my head, but I must have gotten it wrong. I was only at 5 when the door popped open. 2 masked men with bulletproof vests and assault rifles, a man in a white lab coat with a protective face mask, a white room with blinding fluorescent lights. They made me turn away and put restraints on as I was dragged to a chair and made to sit down. I felt so weak, like I'd been pulled out of bed at 3 in the morning. The man in the lab coat got down on one knee to face me. "Where did you graduate?" "Southwest. San Antonio, right?" "Right. Where were you before that?" I explained the circumstances. My time in Tomskog, Minnesota, a couple of years in West Virginia. Before that, South Dakota. That's where I'd spent most of my life. The man was very patient, allowing me to explain. I saw him making notes on a clipboard, doing check marks next to lines my eyes were too fuzzy to read. "Checks out," he said as I finished. "You were never part of the class long enough to get any booster shots or heat therapy." "No, nothing like that." "So when you hear names like Digman, Babin, Bogan, that means nothing to you?" "It rings a bell, but..." I shrugged. I could hear the resignation in his voice as he got back up, giving the others a long look. The armed men shuffled about, looking at one another. "Put him in a room," the doctor said. "He's not part of the subject line. I'll sort it out. Go ahead and tell Ridge to prep for extraction." "Sir, the man's a fucking veterinarian. What the hell are we going to use him for?" The doctor snapped back. "Are you that desperate to get your cat's teeth cleaned?" "No, sir." They led me through the facility. All corridors sort of looked the same, but they were brimming with people. You could hear all sorts of noises. I recognized one as a bone saw. We went past this one room where they had a pod like mine on a table, preparing for surgery. I was escorted to a small room, bright as all hell, but there was a dimmer switch. Sleek interior, like if Apple made a hotel room. Lights along the ridges of the furniture. A ceiling fan that could be heard but not seen. A TV built into the wall. A queen-sized bed, a couch, and a bedside table with a water pitcher and a glass. A bathroom with a shower. A mini fridge with a couple of snacks and sodas. Honestly, I'd slept in worse places. I took some time to decompress. I was still a prisoner, but at least they were hearing me out. I figured there'd been a mistake, but I couldn't figure out exactly what. Maybe someone in that class had done something terrible, and everyone they'd been involved with was under scrutiny. But if so, why wait this long? I couldn't figure it out, but I counted my blessings. I was out of that damned pod. With a little luck, I might be able to get on a flight back home sooner rather than later. I couldn't imagine how worried my family might be. Coming home to an empty house and an unlocked front door. They must have called the police. I managed to get the TV going. They had a couple of movies available, so I put something on just to not get drowned in my own thoughts. It was then that I realized just how high-strung I really was. I could feel my muscles relaxing and my heart slowing. I'd been on the verge of collapse all this time, and only now could I feel some semblance of recovery. I took a shower and changed into some fresh clothes. There was a wardrobe with generic slacks and t-shirts. I figured they wouldn't mind. I was halfway through a Bill Murray comedy when the door opened. A woman in a gray pantsuit was escorted inside by an armed guard. I was forced up against the wall on the opposite side of the room. They checked my pockets for weapons and had me sit on the bed. As he finished, the woman turned to him. I think she was in her mid-30s. Had this short, almost platinum blonde stubble of hair. "We got it from here," she said. "You can wait outside." The man left. She sat down on the couch across from me, looking at the paused frame of the movie with a vacant smile. "I just think we ought to have a conversation," she said. "I don't want to interrupt your me time." "I can talk," I assured her. "Talk away." "There's been a level of miscommunication," she explained, "as I'm sure you're aware. Do you mind telling me why I'm here? What do you think you're doing?" She gave me a long look, tilting her head. "I want you to consider something," she said. "Think about where you are, about who you might be talking to. Consider the lengths we've gone to in order to get you here, into this room. Now ask yourself this. Is asking me a question like that beneficial to your current situation?" I shook my head, staying quiet. "I would agree," she continued. "So maybe we should stick to me asking the questions." She went through a list of checkpoints, asking about my mental and physical health. She asked me about people I spent a lot of time with and about my children and spouse. It's as if they were looking to see if anything stood out. She couldn't find anything. She corroborated my accounts with what had been said previously, adding little check marks to a list. "Well," she sighed, "it appears you weren't supposed to be on that list. I suppose an apology would be in order." She turned to me, putting away her notepad. She opened a shoulder bag, producing a set of papers and a pen. This has been an unfortunate misunderstanding, and we will be sure to rectify it. I think we can come to terms. Does this involve me being put in an unmarked grave? Nothing quite so dramatic. She smiled. That would create a lot of questions. I think the best thing for both of us is to arrange a small cover story and compensate you handsomely for your time. I was given a contract with a firm called Hatchet Pharmaceuticals. This contract confirmed that I'd been consulting them on an important project. They spelled out a point list of items to be compensated for, like food, hotel rooms, overtime pay, and all the bells and whistles. There were receipts. All in all, it was more than fair compensation. Just over 6 figures. A solid cover story. We're very thorough, she said. We can assign a representative to explain the situation to your family. I think that'd be for the best, I agreed. And after this, we're done. We walk away, correct? Correct. I'll have you on a flight first thing in the morning. I had no further questions. I signed it. I hope you see why we can't let you roam the facility. You'll have to stay the night, but we'll do our best to accommodate you. That's fine. Just an early flight. The earliest. Of course. She got up, leaving a copy of the contract. As she left the room, I noticed the armed guard still waiting outside. She turned to me a final time. I'll get you a root beer. I know you like them. I can't say she was wrong. I suspect they'd taken a step back and examined what they knew about me a little closer. For a couple of hours, I was comfortable. They got me a proper steak dinner and a root beer, and I ended up watching movies until I fell asleep. The lighting was pretty impressive. It started to dim on its own once it noticed me getting into bed. In that moment, I was positive about the whole thing. If I'd been compensated, there would be an apology and explanation given to my family, and I could put it all behind me once and for all. Now I just had to wait for that early plane and hope for the best. I didn't have a clock or anything, but I must have slept for about 2 hours when I noticed something. The buzz of the ceiling fan stopped, and the dimmed lights went completely black. I waved my arm a little to see if there was a sensor, but nothing happened. Getting up, I went to check the door. It must have had some kind of magnetic lock, because I still couldn't open it. Then I did something. It's hard to explain why. I heard this thumping noise, and I just had this feeling. Like, it's one thing to hear footsteps, but this sounded wrong. I stepped aside and pressed myself up against the wall, facing away from the door. Seconds later, something stopped outside my room, and I heard this metallic groan. The door was bent open, inch by inch. Mechanisms snapped to and bent from immense pressure. Something was standing in the doorway. I heard this low rumble, like a snoring bull, then a crack, followed by a loud chewing, like someone eating a fresh carrot. More. The voice was more of a gargle. It sounded like it came from the chest of something, rather than the mouth. I could smell this sharp tang of iron in the air as there was another snap. The intruder was dragging something along the ground, taking the occasional bite. Snap, chew, more. The lights in the hall were still out, so even though the door was open, I couldn't see a thing. I held my breath and ducked down low as a large hand swept by just to my right. It was looking for the dimmer switch. When it realized it wasn't working, it snorted and left the room, lumbering off down the hallway, dragging a snack along. I used my hands to feel my way out the door. It was bent in the middle and barely clinging to its hinges. The lock mechanism was still there, but it was so busted that you could pull it out with your bare fingers. I almost slipped in something as I reached the opposite wall. Something must have happened, and I'd be stupid to just sit and wait for it to blow over. There was a hum, a short, low hum. Some kind of backup generator came on, bathing the hallway in a red light. My eyes adjusted as I realized I was standing in a liquid that covered most of the hallway. It might have been red. It was impossible to tell, but given how it smelled, I'm pretty sure I was standing in a pool of blood. There were torn pieces of armor splattered on the walls, along with patches of skin clinging to the fabric. I'd never seen anything like it. It's hard to be afraid of something so violent. It's one thing to see a strange man with a knife. That is scary. But to see a pile of corpses out in the open? I mean, yes, that's scary, but it's almost too scary. I remember watching that patch of skin slide down the wall, shaking my head, thinking that there was no point in trying to understand what had happened. There was no point in asking questions. I just had to get out of there. I tried to backtrack through the hallways. There were these pipes on the walls in different colors and symbols, but I couldn't make sense of them. They were most likely there to help guide people to various departments. There were arrows, though, so I figured if I went the opposite way, that should bring me back to the origin point, or maybe even the exit. What had happened in my corridor was no isolated incident. There were signs of struggles all over. The room where they had prepped for surgery was covered in black goo and had a hand pressed against hardened glass. There was another room that, when you got close, your hearing stopped, like when you get water in your ear, only deeper. I couldn't even hear my heartbeat. I could feel it, but it's hard to explain. It was as if something bad was waiting around every corner, and the further I got, the worse it felt. My hearing eventually returned. It felt like coming up from a deep dive. I walked through a corridor where I could hear something eating in the next room. Something is making bird noises. I did see a couple of living people, but they had these strange white masks on and didn't seem to respond to anything. Absolutely everything had gone to shit in a matter of hours. I heard voices up ahead. My first instinct was to run ahead and see what was going on. But I stopped myself. From what I'd seen so far, things weren't that simple. I stayed by the corner, listening. Door locked. A second voice. Yes, locked. A third person joins the conversation. Wandering in from an adjoining corridor, you mask faces happy just standing here. A man's voice. He had a strange intonation, like he couldn't help but roll his R's and end his sentences in a gulping noise. It reminded me of one of the kids I went to high school with, Roy. He had this speech impediment, like a stutter. He'd stop it by swallowing hard and shaking his head like a tick. It was such a specific noise. It was hard to pinpoint with a description, but that's where it hit me. Roy, Melonhead. These were old Minnesota classmates. They'd brought me in on suspicion of being part of this class. Chances were that these same people had been brought in as well. That may very well be Roy on the other side of the hallway. But if that was the case, what did that mean? Was all this chaos perpetrated by my old classmates? If so, what the hell happened to them? Making my way to the main corridor, I ran across a series of gruesome sights. There was a man covered head to toe in some kind of black acid, melting him into bone. There were several patrols of people with white masks, speaking to each other like grunting cavemen. I stopped counting dead bodies after 20, instead trying to keep my eyes on the marks on the wall. I eventually got to a lobby of sorts. 2 massive storm doors had gone down, blocking the exit. There'd been a massacre. At least 8, maybe 10 people, all crushed against the door. They'd tried to get out, but got caught on the wrong side. The red lights on the walls spin round and round, making the shadows livelier than the remains that cast them. I heard someone approaching and escaped into a side room. There was a couch, a drink machine, a microwave, and a fridge. Clearly some kind of lunchroom. The red light didn't reach all the way in, casting a long strand of red peeking through the half-closed door. I hurried inside and pressed myself up against the wall. It didn't take me long to realize I wasn't alone. Someone was hiding behind the couch. "You need to leave," a voice whispered. "I have a gun." I shook my head and put a finger on my lips to shush them. I could hear someone approaching from outside. "You need to leave right now," they insisted. "I'm not asking. This is my spot." I shook my head again. If they fired a weapon, this place would be crawling with things in a matter of seconds. They'd doom us both. The problem was, something was already coming our way. The door creaked a little, I could see the shadow of two long legs as something bent down to enter. It's impossible to describe the scale of this thing. It was at least 10, maybe 11 feet tall, like an elongated person, a slick black jelly-like skin rippling with chunks. As it moved, I could spot patches of white poking out at different angles. Bones, like someone had deconstructed a person and jammed it into a walking puddle. There was hesitation. Whoever was hiding in there with me decided to shut the hell up. A long arm reached out, touching the side of the drink machine. It was such a casual movement, but it was forceful enough to knock the whole thing onto the floor with a bang. A couple of cans rattled out of it. The tall thing poked around a little, making one of the cans burst from the pressure. That seemed to amuse it. It pulled on a pop tab, seemingly frustrated. I could hear something in the distance, like a whir getting louder and louder, then a series of mechanical clicking and a spark. The lights were coming back on. The red gave way to harsh fluorescent light as I saw this thing in full and clear view. It was barely keeping itself together. It was like someone was trying to hold old Jell-O with a two-pronged fork. It was looking at the person hiding behind the couch. They weren't as well hidden as they thought they were. It only took me a brief glance to realize it was the woman with the gray pantsuit that had talked to me earlier. As the thing saw her, she pulled out her gun. I covered my ears and sank to the floor. There was gunfire and screaming. The creature had a hand big enough to cover her face and used it to push the back of her head into the ground. It must have had some kind of suction force to it as the body stuck to it. The screams came and went in a flash. There really was no fanfare to it. Just a quick snap, and then nothing. By the time I looked up, the thing was already looking at more interesting items around the room. It seemed particularly curious about the soda cans. That it was holding a whole corpse seemed more like an inconvenience. But as it turned to leave, it spotted me. There was a moment of silence as it looked at me, as if trying to understand what it was seeing. A single soda can rolled across the floor, touching my foot. I looked at it, then up at the creature. Why was it so interested? What was the deal? I picked up the can, popped it open, and held it up. "Is this it?" I asked. "You want me to open it?" It tilted its head. It wasn't convinced. It reached out, carefully, poking the pop tab. I pulled it off, presenting it. "This?" I asked. "You want this?" An oil-slick hand reached for it, accidentally grazing my finger. The skin on my index finger turned a sickly orange as my nail darkened. I could feel a deep ache, as if my nerve was hardening. My finger curled in on itself as it picked up the pop tab. It held it up, looking at it from different angles. I only knew of one person who collected things like that. I pointed at a nearby table. "There are cups," I said. "You can put it in a cup, collect them, put them all together again, all the same, just like you want it to." The thing turned its head. At least I think it did. It was hard to see that it was looking one way or another at all. I don't even think it had eyes to begin with. As it turned its attention to the other soda cans and the empty coffee cups, I reached for what remained of the lady in gray. Half of her was still hanging out of that thing, dangling like a broken doll. There was a twitch to the leg, like there was something inside trying to get her to run. Like an operator calling out on a line where no one's listening. She was still holding something in her hand, barely visible through the black sludge. I bent her hand, open. It made a snapping noise as a tendon protested, revealing a key card. I pulled it loose only for the sludge thing to turn my way. It did not appreciate this intrusion. With one step, it closed the distance. It reached for me with its free hand. I had to do something, or I'd be next. "Hank," I called out. "It's Hank, right?" The hand slowed, dropping to the floor. The ceramic tiles turned a sickly blue, fizzling. I could see something just beneath the surface of the sludge. A cranium. There really was some kind of head under there, and it was looking my way. "You collect things," I said. "You arrange them in jars. You had them in your locker." It stared at me as something bubbled beneath its surface, bones moving up and down, rearranging themselves. "Is that what you're doing?" I asked. "Are you collecting now?" It bobbed its head. "If we go outside, you can collect so many more things," I said. "But then we have to open the door." It bobbed its head again and stepped back, leaving room for me to leave. I did. The main lobby was filled with various things. People in masks, something large, chewing on an arm. I think I saw the Babin siblings in there, but I can't say for sure. The large thing in the back stepped forward the moment it saw me, pointing with its whole arm. There was no doubt in my mind that I knew this person. Melonhead. His facial features looked a bit exaggerated from when I'd last seen him, and he was a whole lot taller, but it was him. I barely recognized him as human now, having almost grayish skin and dark eyes. I could see him salivating as he dropped a bloodless limb to the floor, advancing towards me in a jog. The sludge thing came up from behind, swinging an arm in a wide arc. It smacked Melonhead over the jaw, sending him reeling back, scratching at his face. The sludge thing was making sure I made it to the door. I could feel the weight of inhuman eyes staring me down. I hurried up to a control panel on the wall, swiping the access card. Step 1 authorization complete. Set an automated system. Please present your hand for biometric confirmation. I swallowed hard as Hank dropped an acid-burned arm next to me. It was surprisingly heavy. I held it up to the panel, manually adjusting the fingers. My stomach churned. It felt like playing with raw chicken. "Please hold," the system asked, as a taskbar reached 100%. Then, green lights. The storm doors started rolling. Some of them ran. Some of them screamed with joy. A couple didn't say a thing. A couple of people with white masks kept guns at the ready, scanning the area for threats. Melonhead lumbered outside, looking for his next snack. And finally, the sludge. He put the coffee cup down, realizing there wouldn't be any more pop tabs around for a while. He wandered off without looking back, stretching out to the point where he rivaled the treetops. By the time the lobby was empty, I stepped outside. Some of them had run into the woods. A couple of them had moved down a westbound path towards the barracks. There was a pine forest ahead, so I guessed I was somewhere in the Midwest or North. The birds sounded familiar somehow. Not much of a reunion, buddy. That strange voice again, with the rolling R's, the gulping. I didn't need to turn around to know I was talking to one of the Babin siblings. I turned to face him, a pale man with slick hair combed back, a hawk-like nose, and these chemically wide eyes. He leaned against the open storm door in a parody of casualness. "I recognize you, you know," he continued. "Class of 2000, yeah," I nodded. "Tomskog High. Didn't you move?" he asked. This is when I noticed he had a knife. He was picking his nails with it. "I did. San Antonio. Too bad," he said. "We had a lot of fun after graduation. I can imagine. I don't think you can." He grinned. "I really don't." He gave me a pat on the shoulder as he passed me by, trying to catch up to his sister. His head bent forward, his steps like that of a prowling cassowary. I managed to get to a highway. From there, I got in touch with the police. From there, it was a series of phone calls, a booked plane, and a tearful reunion with my family. I didn't know what to say to them. Was I still bound by that contract? Was there anyone left in that facility to reimburse me? I had no idea. I stuck to this story as well as I could. I did get a check in the mail not long after, printed on cheap paper with a stamped blue sunflower logo. It came with a notice that I would only be getting one payment. They were shutting down that branch of the organization for an emergency restructuring. I guess Hatchet Pharmaceuticals is getting shuttered. I couldn't care less, if I'm honest. I got paid, and I got out. I had to go through surgery to get my finger fixed. The acid burn was bad. and they described the damage as my index finger trying to pull into itself. Had to walk around with a cast for weeks. I know this all seems too fantastic to be true. A lot of things are. I could write a full book on any one of those corridors, but looking back now, it all feels like a distant dream. It was so unreal that it felt like it happened to someone else. And it's not what I saw that haunts me the most. It's what I felt, a pulse beating out of my chest, not knowing if the next beat will be my last. Stepping around the corner, praying that no one heard me struggling to breathe. That feeling comes back every now and then. I can be standing in my bedroom, looking at the door, and I just get this sense that there is someone waiting on the other side. There isn't, but that doesn't stop me from thinking there is. I have not been contacted about the class of 2000 since. I have not heard the name of Tomskog High mentioned. There have been no emails, no texts, and no strange visits. No white vans pulling up in my driveway, telling me lies. And I don't know if that's a good thing. Something tells me it isn't. Story number 3. Cambria never existed. That's what they want you to believe. But I watched her die. Now they're coming for me. I might already be gone by the time you read this, but it doesn't matter. I need to tell you the truth. Cambria and I met during freshman orientation at Forrester University, both pretending not to be scared. She wore a Misfits shirt, 4 sizes too big, and duct tape around her boots. Not for style, but to hold the nightmares in, according to her. We bonded over cheap coffee, obscure metal bands, and our mutual hatred of small talk. Most nights we would put on some music and do our best impression of being rock stars, or stay up late and watch horror movies together. She and I would take turns reading Lovecraft and Ligotti stories in deadpan British accents to see who could make others laugh the hardest before. Bet Cambria wasn't just my best friend. She was the only person who ever made me feel like I mattered. So when she disappeared, I knew something was horribly wrong. The university claimed she'd gone home for a family emergency. But the problem with that excuse was that Cambria didn't have a family. She had no parents, no siblings, only me. I called, I texted, and I even emailed her professors, but nothing ever came of it. Her student email? Gone. The login screen just said, "User not found." When I checked her dorm, someone else was living there. A girl who insisted she'd been there the whole semester. I went to campus police, but they told me that if she went home due to a family emergency, there was no point in investigating. No one seemed to be that bothered by her disappearance, and what was once hot gossip on university campus eventually quieted. It was like she'd been surgically removed from the world, and my memory was next. One night I lay in bed, rereading the last text Cambria ever sent me repeatedly. "I'm looking into something I found here on campus. I'm going under to fight it. If something happens to me, don't go looking." Was this about the sleep study she talked about signing up for on campus? I remembered her telling me about it once. I thought maybe they could help me, shut the nightmares out for good. That was her reasoning for participating. We used to joke about our sleep paralysis demons like they were nothing more than late-night hallucinations. But now, I'm not so sure. A few weeks after she vanished, I saw them walk for the first time. I remember waking up to the sounds of beds creaking, one after another, slowly, all down the hallway, in sync. Confused, I crept to my door quietly and cracked it open to see students filing out of their rooms. Maybe 15, maybe 20, moving in complete silence. Their eyes were half-lighted, arms limp at their sides. They had that eerie weightlessness you see in the movements of sleepwalkers, like the bodies running on instinct instead of thought. Their footsteps clacked in a soft, dragging hush across the linoleum as I tried to process what exactly I was witnessing. Jenny, one of the girls from down the hall, passed my door. Her lips moved, barely audible. Velkirash. It sounded like a breathy, nonsensical syllable, not like a word. I wanted to step out and speak, but I stood frozen in the dark, watching them walk in unison down the stairs until they disappeared into the dark. The next morning, it was just like any other day on campus. I casually asked around to see if I could get a better understanding of what I saw. "Did you have any weird dreams last night?" I received some blank stares, a few laughs, and a lot of questionable looks. No one seemed to remember anything about the events of that night. Everyone seemed to think I was the crazy one. However, I did receive a lead from a random person on campus who told me to check out the campus sleep study. It was apparently Forrester's best-kept secret. I searched the university archives and found the sleep study. Sort of. I found it tucked away under an archived projects folder in the psychology department. It was called the SSM Protocol, Sleep State Manipulation, and it was supposedly terminated 2 years ago. There were no names of any participants listed, but the folder was labeled Group C. I couldn't shake the thought. C for Cambria. The only name tied to the project was Dr. Isaac Trenholm, one of Cambria's professors. His faculty page was gone. The only result I could find was an old PDF titled On Induced Conscious Dissonance During REM Cycles. It was 40 pages of dense medical jargon, but one paragraph stood out. In a guided hypnagogic state, the mind can be gently urged with the word Velkirash. Translation: to hollow the vessel so the womb may be filled. To accommodate a second tenant, dream entities cannot enter the waking world unless the mind is first emptied, as it is only dangerous when paired with autonomy. A lucid mind can be a prison or a doorway. We are simply opening the door. There was that word again, Velkirash. What was Dr. Trenholm talking about? What was he hoping to accomplish with this? I thought about the text message Cambria sent me, and how she could have known something was wrong with the sleep study. She didn't just fall into this. She volunteered to go under to stop whatever it was they were doing. But it cost her everything. That night, at 2:33 a.m., the beds creaked in a dreadful domino-like rhythm as the students got out of bed and began walking. Instead of watching, I followed closely behind this time. The procession moved past the quad toward the faculty buildings, their bare feet slapping softly against the pavement. My heart pounded as I mimicked their pace behind a tall boy from my statistics class. His head lolled slightly as he walked, his jaw slack as he whispered under his breath, "Velkirash, Velkirash." They stopped at a locked maintenance gate on the east side of campus. A student stepped forward and pressed her palm flat against the metal. The gate creaked open slowly, and they walked inside. I froze at the entrance. The air seeping out was sour and carried a faint chemical sting that burned my nostrils. One of the students turned her head towards me. Not all the way, just enough that her half-open eyes brushed over me. For the first time, I thought I saw recognition flicker there. "Vel," she breathed. My pulse spiked as I stepped back too quickly. I panicked and tripped over my own foot. The sound echoed, causing every head in the group to turn at once. Their eyes glinted in the dim lamplight. Dozens of slack faces locked onto me. I bolted, my footsteps thudding across the concrete as I ran. Behind me, their murmurs swelled into a chorus of chanting. It chased me across the quad, growing louder even though I didn't dare look back. By the time I reached my dorm, the chanting had stopped, but I didn't dare close my eyes. I never took my eyes off the hallway the rest of the night. I saw them walk 3 times before I followed. I told myself I was gathering information, but really I was just afraid. I wasn't ready to go where she went, not yet. However, my mind was made up. The longer I waited, the more I felt her slipping away, like the world was actively forgetting her. I was terrified that if I waited too long, I wouldn't even remember who I was trying to save. That's what motivated me to practice in my room until I could mimic the limp limbs and shallow breathing of the unconscious mind. I practiced in the mirror, swaying with my eyes cracked just enough to see, until I couldn't tell where pretending ended and becoming something hollow began. At exactly 2:33 a.m., when they rose from their beds to sleepwalk, I slipped into the already full hallway and joined them. No one looked at me. We moved together, barefoot, a slow procession of blank faces through the dark. Outside the campus, the air was dense like underwater pressure. The lamplight didn't stretch as far as it should have across the quad as we passed the fountain toward the old biology lab. Its windows were boarded, and chains were wrapped around the doors where a "Do Not Enter" sign hung crooked, the red ink sun-bleached into pink. One of the students in the front of the pack reached out and touched the chain. There was no rattling, no snapping. It simply fell apart, causing the doors to swing open on their own. Inside, we passed through narrow, decaying corridor as the doors shut behind us. Fluorescent lights hummed and flickered overhead. One buzzed so violently it blew out and stayed dark for a full minute. In that darkness, I felt the breath of one of the students upon the back, my neck. When the light returned, the hallway was unchanged, but I couldn't stop shaking. Symbols covered the walls. Spirals, slashes, intersecting circles. One had been scratched out violently, gouged deep into the plaster. Then came the stairs, a narrow, concrete stairwell, slick with condensation, and no railings led us down. Every step echoed like we were walking inside a throat. A flickering light above us died again, and in that moment of darkness, I heard a voice echo faintly from inside the pipes. Vel Kirash. The syllables bounced off the walls strangely. It was as if they were being spoken in reverse. When the light came back, everyone continued walking without reaction. The walls shifted gradually from cinder block to smooth, cold stone as we traversed across the uneven floors. And then we reached the lab. Or maybe it was never just a lab. At the center of the room stood Cambria, her breath ragged. In front of her was Dr. Isaac Trenholm, chanting in a language that felt older than words. She wasn't restrained. She chose to be there. Maybe she thought if she gave herself willingly, she could stop him from taking someone else. But whatever she'd hoped to fight was winning. The others stood around with their eyes closed, not watching, but chanting. Each word that escaped their lips tightened the noose around her heart. The carved symbols on the walls pulsated a sickly green in time with their chants. The thing inside Cambria was not merely emerging. It was consuming her from within. Her lungs convulsed. Something slithered beneath the skin of her ribcage, pressing against her heart. Spider silk like tendrils entwined with her blood vessels, siphoning the life from her body as she twitched. Involuntarily, I watched through squinted eyes as her muscles spasmed in a desperate attempt to let out a scream that she couldn't. She silently mouthed a desperate "help me" from her cracked lips. I wanted to cry out her name and tell her I was there, but instead, I watched in horror. Her eyelids fluttered in anguish as something tore free. Dr. Trenholm staggered forward as the cracking of Cambria's skull filled the chamber, his face shining with sweat. His lips trembled with joy as the creature, slick with afterbirth, tore itself free. Trenholm exhaled a sigh of relief as it emerged from her skull, its skin thin, translucent, and showing twitching veins. Tears dripped from the corners of her eyes and down her cheeks as its limbs moved in all the wrong ways. Jerking violently, her fingers twitched and curled into a fist, then opened like a flower wilting in fast forward. For a second, her eyes cleared, no longer glassy but wet with terror. She looked at me, mouthed my name. And for a moment, she was there. Then she was gone. The creature's mouth twisted into a terrible imitation of a smile, but it wasn't a face built for warmth. And then, a barely audible whisper, "Don't wake up." The words pierced me, a desperate plea, and a warning all at once. The creature's head snapped toward me with impossible speed. Its vacant, half-formed eyes locked onto mine, and I felt a cold click inside my chest. I couldn't stop the scream. "Get her," Dr. Trenholm commanded, pointing at me. I didn't think. I just ran as fast as I could. I sprinted through the dark, lungs burning, the air thick with blood and chemicals. Claws scraped against concrete behind me, gouging deep into the walls. Emergency lights flickered, casting warped shadows as I ran. My chest tightened as the sound of footsteps dragging softly but deliberately just out of sight grew louder behind me. All the students from earlier. They were hunting me as well. I could hear the creature's movements close behind. I turned to see its limbs dragging and then snapping forward unnaturally, fast like watching stop motion in real time. It let out a wet, gurgling rattle as it pounced. Its ice-cold claws grazed my shoulder. I twisted away, my shirt ripping as I felt warm blood drip down my back. The students were practically breathing down my neck, but the adrenaline coursing through me wouldn't let me stop. Door ahead shimmered faintly, and desperation made me sprint for it with everything I had. I slammed into it with all my weight and finally burst out into the cold night air I kept running beneath, flickering street lamps that buzzed and sputtered like they were dying. Every step I took felt heavier, the world around me tilting just slightly off balance. My heart hammered like a frantic drum as I collapsed onto the cracked sidewalk, gasping for air as I dared to look back. The building loomed behind me, its boarded windows like dead eyes. Somewhere inside, the creature still waited. I know the truth. I know what I saw. I never went back, and I've been running ever since. I found her, and I failed her. I wonder if she was still in there, if her last feeling was pain, or if she was already gone, carved out, emptied like a house no one remembers living in. It's been a week now, and I'm at a bus station 3 states away typing this. My friends say they don't remember me. Not just Cambria, me. One of them even asked who I was before hanging up. Last night, at the motel I stayed at, I thought I saw someone standing across the street watching me. I shut the blinds, locked the door, wedged a chair under the knob, and still, I heard it. At 2:33 a.m., the faint shuffle of bare feet against the floor, and a harsh whisper through the vent. Vel Kirash. I don't know how much longer I can run before they take me back underground, before I forget why I was running at all. If you've ever dreamed of stairs that only go down, don't follow, please. For me, for Cambria, just run. Story number 4. Looking back at it, I think I know exactly why it all came down to it. Why I had to become a frantic runaway, paranoid of the things lurking in the corner of my eye. Why I couldn't stop even for a second. Not to eat, not to sleep, not even to relieve myself. And why this ever-extending mass of joints, vaguely shaped like a human and adorned in a jacket, seemingly labeled with the insignia of every major federal agency, alongside a few of them that I was certain don't exist, was hot on my trail. There at its chest lay these symbols, going in order from real agencies to utter nonsense, the further down they were placed. The Central Intelligence Agency, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Department of Defense, Internal Revenue Service, the Department of Justice, and so forth and so on. Every inch of the jacket worn by the creature was covered in those insignia, which as children we were taught to fear and to respect. The deviations only began at its unbelievably thin midsection. There were a couple of now defunct agencies and offices spread around, oddities of history, but there was also a lot of nonsense. No other way to describe it. Among those, a few stood out as especially outrageous. The DD, Department of Democide, AHC, Agency for Highway Creation, CCC, Cultural Context Castration Committee, NCRP, National Council for Environmental Pollution, GRSD, Gulf Rumor Suppression Department, and BPOCC, Bureau of Psychological Operations and Cattle Control. The symbol featured a bovine front and center. Those were only the most legible ones among the mass of symbols spread across the monster. The more attention one paid to the fine details, the more insane and schizophrenic the whole picture seemed to become. As I've said at the very beginning, I know exactly why this man, if indeed one could call him that, was sicked on me. It all started with a delivery like any other. I was, and suppose no longer am, what's known as a low-level operator. I'm far beyond getting in trouble with the police now, so I might as well speak more freely about it. However, consider the names and accompanying folklore behind criminal figures related to me as fabrications meant to throw off any future inquiries. There is hardly a reason to drag others down with me. I've gotten into the business on behalf of a friend, Rudolph, a longtime junkie and a dealer. Oddly enough, it was meds that got him started. He was a wild kid, and so of course they got him on the benzodiazepine analog Xanax. Hard stuff. It was all downhill from there. But I'd hang out with him regardless. Anytime he would screw up whatever job and come back to our hometown to live with his parents for a bit. Again, we'd meet and we'd have fun. He would often offer to include me in on the junk. I rejected it. He appreciated that I've long given up on trying to get him off the stuff. And I appreciated having someone to chat and go on long walks through the forest with, even if by the end I'd inevitably have had to drag his now unconscious body on my back, all the way back to his mom's. It made for some great memories, hearing him mumble on about whatever nonsense as the sunset closed in around us, and all the little woodland critters skittered about. I miss those times now more than ever. During one of our walks, I mentioned my financial struggles, and he offered a tantalizing offer of a part-time job. I was swayed by the promises of a swift and easy paycheck, even more so because, for the obvious reasons, it would evade taxation. I was never briefed about the exact working of the organization he distributed for, nor have I cared to pry. All I knew is that Rudolph, street name Donny Boy, answered to a single superior. Every few weeks, Rudolph would come around and pay out what he owed. Then he'd get more stuff to sell or ingest. His boss, whose street name was Swab, did not care whether he skimmed off the top or whether he upcharged and made extra for himself. If Rudolph paid for the supplies and his margin, everything was, as Swab used to put it, golden. I liked that about our boss, the sort of greedlessness one couldn't expect, even out of a world leader. My job was simple. Dead drops and the relay of information between relevant parties. A couple of times a week I'd meet with a guy at the local Burger King, with no electronics on my person, never in regular intervals, and there I'd be passed instructions for the month. It usually averaged 4 dead drops a week, handled at my discretion and at my responsibility. The information relay tasks were infrequent. I suspect I was filling in for someone else, or perhaps it doesn't take much of an information transfer to keep a criminal empire alive. I usually got up early. Around 4, drove out into the boonies following the specific geographical coordinates, dug out whatever cash, and then delivered it later in the day at the specified location and time. I did exactly as I was told. Never asked a single question unless absolutely relevant. Never looked into any of the packages I had to handle, and I never messed a delivery up. Not once. Swab seemed to appreciate my reliability, Half a year in, I was offered a promotion, an enforcer position, 4 times the pay, but I'd have to get my hands dirty. I rejected the offer and resumed my routine. Swab was disappointed but understanding. Before I departed from my promotion meeting, he told me the following. Lad, the fact you declined is precisely why I wanted you to take the job. You can't even imagine how many fuck-ups you have to babysit in this industry. Lads like you are rare. He waved his hand in the air vaguely. Diamonds. You get instructions, you follow them. You don't come crying for more money than you know you're worth. And what's most important, you don't get these. These fantasies of patricide. We had to put down a delivery boy just like yourself last week. He was using, and that must have made him think he was the shit. Started off small, with a stolen package or 2. Then he tried to shank one of my guys. I put them down. That's why they call me the Swab. You know, I take out the grime, and I get dirty. I don't send my guys out unless necessary. I handle my business. I stopped him there, and pretended not to have heard the latter part of the conversation, hoping he'd take the hint. I was fine working with the man, but I did not care one bit for his business, especially if it made me a witness to murder. He quickly understood my position and waved me off, once again remarking that, "See, that's why you're golden, lad." I knew then that even if I had to testify against the man, I wouldn't. It may sound insane, but he was by far the best boss I've had to date. I don't know if it's the sheer wit necessary to make it in the criminal world, or if he was just truly a great guy. But he seemed to avoid the usual inflation of ego that followed the acquisition of a management position. Not only that, but he was also content with just letting me do my job. It's surprising how rare that is. Years went on, and I continued my part-time work, with no hiccups and minimal interference with my daily life. Donny boy Rudolph had died of an overdose a month prior. I suppose it was an omen of things to come. The morning it all went to shit, I got a call on my burner. A man whose voice I didn't recognize told me there'll be an additional delivery today. It wasn't me who was meant to handle it, but my predecessor had been put under surveillance by the authorities. It wasn't the first time something like that had happened. I suppose it was the reason as to why I had been employed in the first place. Routine leaves patterns, and those are easy for law enforcement to exploit. The only unusual part of the delivery was that once I've recovered the box, I'd have to bring it straight to Swab himself. This had never happened before. Degrees of separation and all. Nothing noteworthy happened on my drive to the spot. When I knelt down to dig the box out of the shallow dirt in which it had been covered, I noticed another odd thing. The box had barely been hidden. It was sticking out padlock first. It looked like someone just forced it into a patch of soft dirt instead of putting in the effort into proper burial. At least it saved me some time. I sighed and picked it up. The second unusual thing was that whatever cargo was inside wasn't properly secured. I could feel and hear it rolling around as I've tilted the box from side to side. It felt like some sort of sludge, in between a solid and a liquid, slowly moving in globs throughout the container. Someone's done a hack job, clearly. I wondered what possibly could have made someone prepare the package in such haste. The drop site was out in the middle of nowhere. Once there, you'd have nothing to worry about, nothing that could force you into a hurry, and no witnesses to be wary of. Just you, the box, and whatever patch of dirt. Then I recalled that my coworker was being surveilled. I looked around the nearby woods in a sudden bout of paranoia, spending a solid 5 or 10 minutes scouring the landscape in search of anything or anyone. It was autumn, and it wouldn't be another hour and a half until the sun rose. That didn't help. Eventually, my gaze rested on a particularly suspicious mess of branches. I stared daggers into it, trying to spot a glint of light, the shape of a human, or anything else out of the ordinary. From behind me, I've heard the creature speak. its voice clear and legible to an almost supernatural degree. The only part of it that wasn't wrong. In the USA alone, more than 500,000 people go missing every year. That's 13 million people since the beginning of the second millennium. Where do you reckon they all go? Its words cut through the ambience of the forest the way a bullet would. I bolted upwards, attempting to turn around and face the creature at the same time. I fell over in the process, and it loomed over me calmly. I raised my head high towards the source of the voice, still clutching the package tightly to my chest. What welcomed my eyes was the most bizarre sight. It looked like an anemic stilt walker, except with the stilts grown into its legs. It wasn't as bizarre looking as it had come to be, but still far from normal. It didn't adhere to human proportions, not even the way joints were supposed to be placed. Every limb it had was longer than it should have been, stretched out like a piece of fabric about to be torn. The legs didn't bend how they were supposed to. It looked like it had an additional knee, the curve of the leg changing its direction as it went between the two. It didn't wear pants, just some sort of a rag tunic wrapped around its hips. It contrasted heavily with the jacket. The midsection was thin and worm-like, the chest bulging as if it were swarming with some sort of unholy vermin. Its limp arms gravitated towards the ground, as if hoping to offer additional support to the whole of the structure. I don't know if it was meant to stay upright, but it did just that in spite of it. The face looked the most human out of all of it, save the utter lack of hair, including eyebrows and the paleness of its skin. The eyes were covered by a pair of thick sunglasses, and I was certain it could see me well. In spite of the darkness surrounding us, at the time, I didn't have the chance to examine the bizarre insignia of its jacket. I saw some official-looking symbols and decided immediately to rush towards my vehicle. My mind was struggling to understand the situation. Was it a Fed? It didn't look human. Could it have been the darkness messing with me? Whatever it was, it couldn't have been good to stick around it. So I kept running. It outran me with just a few ginormous stilt-walker steps, and stood in front of the hood of my truck calmly. Just as I made it into the cabin, I wasn't thinking straight, and I engaged the ignition, fully intending to ram through it. Then it crouched over, leaned down so that its torso and elongated legs were perfectly parallel to one another, and bent its head beyond what's humanly possible to be eye level with my windshield, stopping me dead in my tracks. Gas engine, good. It mimicked puffing a cigarette with its empty, malformed hands, still bent in the most unnatural of positions. Did you know? In 1990, a man named Stanley Meyer made the world's first hydrogen car engine. We killed him. It pointed its cigarette towards the hood of my car. The media called it the water fuel cell because it sounds insane. It's a mechanism that supposedly made water into fuel for your car. Insane, is it not? 2 parts hydrogen, the stuff we burnt to reach the moon, and 1 part oxygen, necessary for any sort of burning reaction. Only a psych ward runaway would think you could fuel an engine with that. Only an idiot would think to turn the ocean into precious fuel. Do you want to know how we killed him? On March 20th, 1998, Meyer has a dinner with 2 prospective Belgian investors. Not even 10 minutes in, he runs out of the restaurant, screaming, "I've been poisoned. I've been poisoned." It couldn't have been much clearer. The county coroner ruled it a cerebral aneurysm. The family pushed for a private autopsy, but was denied. Last year, Honda or Fiat or... it's all the same, really. Nowadays, every car manufacturer worth his salt has a hydrogen car in their stock. We killed Stanley Allen Meyer. We put poison into his pasta, and we called his brother a moron for suspecting as much. It took one last poof of its imaginary cigarette and pretended to put it out against the hood of my truck. The only reason the Wright brothers have flown is because no one believed that they could. The creature stretched its stilt-like legs to the sides so as not to collide with my truck, and straightened out. I readily took the hint and sped out of there, my heart beating in my chest. One hand on the steering wheel, my package confined securely within the glove box compartment. I reached for my burner and dialed. Swab. Boss, boss, boss. Pick up. It's serious. Are you there? Yep, kid. What's the issue? I know you wouldn't call if it wasn't serious. I think I might be being followed. I've met something that looked like a Fed, except it was really, really weird. Didn't look like a person, but it spoke. It told me about the water fuel cell and missing people cases. What the fuck was it? Didn't try to arrest me or anything, but I'm pretty sure it watched me pick up the package. I'm not being followed right now. Has this happened before? What do I do with the package? Again. Shit. Hang on. I could faintly make out the noises of shuffling and an indistinct conversation somewhere off to the side. All right, kid. Here's what you're going to do. You drop the package off at the recycling bin at the kebab joint on the north side of town. Got it? Then you get your ass to the usual meeting spot. I'll explain everything there. Got it. Got it. Should I, do the thing? Break the burner? Might as well. See you there. With that, the call ended. I drove to the local fast food restaurant as per the instructions. I kept looking over my shoulder over and over, stuck in a frantic state of fight or flight. I managed to calm myself ever so slightly and try to appear inconspicuous during the drop-off. I don't think the clerk bought it. The creature seemed to be nowhere in sight. I suppose, as ghastly and unnatural as it was, it couldn't have possibly been faster than a car. Once the drop-off was complete, I promptly made my way to Swab's office, located out of a small storage unit on the other side of the city. Still shook and paranoid, I knocked 4 times and awaited for the door to roll up. Eventually, after a brief moment, it did. "Come on in, kid," said Swab as he waved me into his tiny office. He sat by his little desk, unbothered as always in spite of the recent happenings. I dropped it off as you've asked. What do we do now, boss? Sorry to tell you this, but this is the end for we. You're burnt, kid. That thing is with the feds. I'll help you out as much as I can. But after this meeting, you no longer work for me. Damn shame, it is what it is, but what can you do? In any case, kid, you did good by me. Most important, you kept your wits around you when the creature showed up. Not the first time it happened. Hopefully the last. What? You've dealt with that thing before, and you didn't tell me? You never were the inquisitive type, lad. I had hoped you wouldn't run into them. Now, if you allow me, I'll tell you everything we do know, including what might keep you safe. Code word, might. All right, boss. Are we safe right now? I don't think I was being followed, but that thing isn't exactly anything I had to deal with before. We should be. We don't know much about the thing. We've only ever seen it once before. The package we had you pick up, you don't want to know what's in that box, but the only other time we handled it before, the same thing happened. No fault in our system. That thing just shows up whenever we deal with that type of a package. We had assumed it wouldn't happen twice in a row, but I suppose now we know better. The lad who picked it up before you thought it was divine intervention, or rather Satan coming to collect his dues. The lad wasn't as squeaky clean as you. He had a few of those good old skeletons in the closet. Personally, don't think it's the devil, as weird as it is. Eckham, in any case, let's speed this up. The thing shouldn't be around here, but it might be. The story's as simple as a whittled stick. The delivery lad picks up the stuff you don't want to know about, and then he starts seeing shit. Immediately after, too. He keeps calling all his contacts, spewing out a bunch of schizophrenic garbage, right? Talking about the World's Fair, pyramids, that one rock statue that centers on the North Star, saying it was built 4,000 years ago, still points to the correct star. proving the Earth's axis doesn't change over the centuries. Like that nonsense fucking matters. Gah. Anyway, point being, he hasn't bothered making the deposit. As soon as he saw the freak, he floored it. All wild goose chase-like, trying to hide all over. Now everyone knows he's burned, so no one wants him around. After all of his contacts told him to fuck off, he takes the hint and starts off towards the border, package still in hand. A day and a half after the initial pickup, we see on the news he committed suicide, with 3 bullet holes in the back of his head and 98% of his epidermis covered in third-degree chemical burns. No one contests the autopsy, or what have you. The family tries to poke and prod, right? Well, a week after they request a private autopsy, the lad's father is found with a trafficking quantity of cocaine, beat to death by an Aryan no less than a week after arriving in the Gen Pop. See what I'm getting at? Now the good news is, as far as we can attest, he kept breathing as long as he did because he kept on the move. On the evening of the second day of the drive, he gets too tired to keep driving, rents a hotel room, and never leaves it. We assume the freak isn't faster than a speeding truck, or that there's a grace period. Have you ever heard about gang stalking? Could be some nonsense like that, beats me. Oh, and they never did recover the package, the cops, I mean. Had a friend on the inside ask around about that. Maybe the freak's only after that. Maybe he'll stop chasing you now that the box isn't on you. In any case, here's what you're going to do, boy. You earned yourself a bonus for not running off into the wild pale yonder. The backpack in front of you has 10,000 in it. You take it, and you floor it toward the border to keep safe, and you don't contact any of our lads for anything, ever again. With some luck, the freak will lose the scent, prioritize the box, and I won't have to hear any more bullshit about Anne Frank's ballpoint pen. For God's sake, my grandma was in the camps. I think someone would have told me something if that was a fib. Heck, in any case, it was a pleasure doing business with you, lad. Shame you got burned. I hope you make it. I really do. Your car shouldn't be in the system. The freak might be with the government, but it isn't anything in the official capacity. Swab extended his hand towards me, and I shook it as firmly as I could. I grabbed the backpack he so graciously prepared, and then I turned around and left. Never again to see perhaps the only man who has ever treated me with respect. Before I could comply with his sagely learned advice, I had to risk it all and go back to my apartment. I left my gun there, and I wasn't going to face whatever the hell that thing was without it. I was already feeling exhausted after living through the initial adrenaline dump, and I had to exercise conscious effort to stay as paranoid as the circumstances warranted. It took me about 20 minutes to reach home. No sign of the freak all the way through, up until I entered the safety of my house. It didn't register to me until after I had already entered, but my television was on, and it was blaring louder than I had ever heard it play. Its volume is matched only by the nonsensical nature of its contents. They sounded like what the freak has spouted on about back at the drop-off site, and what Swab had mentioned secondhand. The freak must have been inside, waiting for me, and yet I had no other choice. I could not leave without my firearm. Worst case scenario, I'd have to shoot it right here and now. As the television screamed at me about how it's impossible to fully gauge the effects of microplastics on the populace, because there is no control group untainted by them to compare with. I bolted to the bedroom, wherein my gun was stashed, not stopping to consider the noise that was being spewed into the surroundings. The firearm I bought, legally, years ago. I forget what mark or make it was specifically. I only recall that it had an oddity about it. A trigger-based safety mechanism. The first shot out of a series required the user to exert much greater force on the trigger, such that it was practically impossible to discharge negligently, while leaving no risk of accidentally leaving the safety on during a life-threatening confrontation. As I knelt down towards the cupboard where it was stashed, I could hear even more nonsense coming from the living room. Bizarre sentences following one another without rhyme or reason. An unidentified official in sob-like blurts of monologue painfully admitted to having sent soldiers into the Iraq conflict in forest pattern bright green camo, hoping they'd die, followed without a pause by the testimony of a researcher utterly entranced by the blood sacrifice traditions still practiced in the less developed parts of Africa to this day. He chuckled as he mentioned female circumcision and how it had been outlawed by the UN back in 2012. It's still a legal practice in Russia to this day, or so I'm told. I grabbed my gun and 2 spare magazines. Now armed and ready, I crept towards the source of the nonsense noise with a renewed sense of almost safety. I expected the freak to be around, but I was certain I could fend him off this time. Perhaps this could be the last I've seen of him. Maybe, just maybe, I found him in front of my television, curled up in an embryo position, his neck extending up towards the television while his body lay there almost independently. To my surprise, the television was not displaying any images in pair to the audio. Instead, it showed the phonetic writing for each word spoken. The freak was mouthing them out, with a blissful smile on his facsimile of a face, childlike wonder radiating off of him as he did so. A thought sparked in my mind that he may be more creature than man, and I discharged 2 shots into his curled-up, massive frame. The trigger gave way far too easily and my ears rang painfully. The freak was stopped dead in his tracks, midway through a fascinating lecture on fiat currency. Without much fanfare, he slowly and calmly got up, blood seeping through the bullet holes in his chest. Now fully distended, he was far too big to fit in my dingy apartment. His bloated back was strained against the ceiling, his knees bending in ways unconceivable toward the floor, and his neck stretched in a fashion most worm-like. Eventually his face, devoid of whatever it is that makes people seem human, has opened up. The stench of freshly printed paper oozed out as he spoke in his distressingly calm tone. Many of the wonders of early World's Fair exhibits have mysteriously burnt down. Treasures of the brightest minds of our civilization lost to the flames forever. Beloved works that serve to decorate the very reality they existed in. During a World's Fair in Chicago in 1893, they burnt down the greatest refrigerator on Earth. They like to joke around like this, you know. Many of the structures were not burned, but were not allowed to stand after the fair's conclusion, and were dismantled. The greatest of them hadn't survived even in photographs. They have made sure of it. I discharged 3 more times, hitting the freak's disjointed head twice and sending a stray round into his arm. He was initially pushed back by the sheer force of the impact, but none of it seemed to make a lasting impression on his unnatural body. The Eiffel Tower was built by 150 proles. 150. That's all it takes to make a world wonder. As of today, the population has exceeded 9 billion, and yet no new wonders have been made since the previous millennium. No one liked the Eiffel Tower when it was first built in 1889. Many have complained of its unsightly nature and the pollution of the natural view. Many more petitioned to have it dismantled after the World's Fair concluded. No one liked it. That's why it survived, you see. The freak reached his thin arm towards my face with a surprising gusto for a man who had just been shot 5 times. I decided to run away. Bullets clearly had no impact on him. I was only spared by the fact that he loved to ramble on about conspiratorial factoids. I began to cautiously retreat towards the exit, still aiming my gun at the uniform-clad creature. The freak followed me at a pace just a little slower than my own, always in view, not letting me get any breathing room. I bumped into the exit door with my back. By my count, I've had another 5 bullets left. I plan to discharge all of them into the Fed, rush towards my vehicle, and do as I was told. The entire detour turned out to be nothing but a big mistake. My heart skipped a bit as I frantically pulled the trigger once, then a second time, a third, and then the last. I realized why the trigger safety hadn't been engaged. Of course, I was such a moron. The creature had been in my house before I arrived. It did something to the gun, or the ammunition, and yet it was hurt by every round I hit it with. The blood was seeping through its uniform even now. So what was the point? Had he snuck into my house just to, shoot my gun once, as if to mock me for even thinking it could be hurt? All 4 of my remaining rounds hit the center mass perfectly, a grouping to be proud of. It did nothing. The unnatural and ghastly being stood as unbothered as it always had been, sweating profusely and deeply as I shook. I desperately tried to rush through the doors and towards my car. I managed to rush through and shut the door behind me as swiftly as my state of utter panic allowed me to. In perfect sync with me, the creature pushed its head through doors, old wood giving way and splintering as it pushed onward. This time it didn't say anything. It just stared at me as I ran down the staircase, tripping over myself. I've been driving for 12 hours now, steadily closing in on the border. No sign of the freak. Much like any other time I've driven, I'm as calm as the circumstance will permit. But the things it said have been bugging me. I've heard about some of it previously, mostly when talking with conspiracy nutjobs and genuine crackheads. No matter how hard I reflected upon its tales of the World's Fair, the man named Stanley Meyer, and its apparent hatred of circumcision, I couldn't make any sense of it. Was it implying that I had found myself amidst a conspiracy? Was I to be discussed for years to come by the mentally ill and the drug-addled long after I had been dealt with? I thought back on the first time I met it, back in the woods. If there was a theme to be had with its ramblings, it's that there was some sort of a mechanism or a conspiracy meant to stop those who rise above. That didn't make much sense either. I wasn't special. I didn't rise above, and no sane person would think me capable of invoking change into the world. I'm no Stanley Meyer or a Wright brother. I was a low-level operator, a city-scale drug mule, a man who has played it far too safe to work his way up, even in the world of crime. And now, I was a runaway. Why was this happening to me? In the end, I concluded that much like the missing bullet from earlier, this was nothing but an intimidation tactic. The question is, what for? Did this freak even have intentions, coherent plans, and an end goal in mind? I set those thoughts aside as I glanced at my fuel gauge. I was running on fumes. The gas in the tank was running out too. I'd have to pull over sooner rather than later. As irrational as it was, I still feared that impossible schizophrenic creature would appear wherever it was I stopped. Knowing well this could be a fatal mistake, I switched lanes and began to near the gas station. The plan was to just get my tank filled up as fast as I could, and then make my way out of there. I rationalized that the creature couldn't have possibly traveled over 700 miles in the span of a dozen hours. I checked my remaining ammunition to make sure it hadn't been messed with and was ready to be used, for all the good that would do, anyway. Then I pulled over. By the time my car came to a halt next to the gasoline dispenser, I had almost convinced myself to relax. I got out, took a brief moment to stretch out my legs, now numb from the long drive, and immediately after scoured the area. No one around. Naught. The place was deserted. Must have been the late hour, but the emptiness of the parking lot only added to the latent paranoia. I must have spent something like 10 or 15 minutes keeping a watchful eye out for my elongated stalker. He was nowhere in sight. At that point, I had realized that I didn't have enough gas in the tank to reach the next station over. It was pointless to make haste. This would be either my last stop before the border or my last stand. With that realization came a sort of calm. The freak wasn't here. He couldn't be here, because if he were, what could I possibly do? He must not be here. I began to feel stupid for ever thinking otherwise. He couldn't fit into a car. He couldn't travel as fast as mine did. I was safe. Reinvigorated by these thoughts, I've made my way to the register and allowed myself to pick up some snacks and drinks for the way. I've spent the last half night Themeron parched and hungry. I wasn't greedy enough to go for a real meal, but I've opted to use the lavatories. Pissing in a bottle can only get you so far. I've dropped off the snacks at the car, snuck a few rapid glances off to the wayside, just to make sure, and headed on into the bathroom, ready to drop off some weight. There, at the back of the dingy gas station, stood the blue bathroom doors, illuminated only by the castaway light straying off of the street lamps, not meant for them. The final stand, the crossing of the Rubicon, the turn of the millennia, the breaking down of the Berlin Wall, the Trinity test detonation with the power of 20 kilotons, and lastly, which I didn't know at the time, the place where I would die. I entered, and as soon as I was a nanometer behind the doorway, I knew that was it. I didn't see the freak there. What I saw instead was his mouth. It stretched to fully cover the dimensions of the bathroom, down to the atom. From the floor to the ceiling, the gaping maw, the width and height of the walls, inching ever so closer. No more forbidden truths to share, no more threats, no more nonsense, just death, the size it shouldn't be. In the time it took me to turn around, I was fully enveloped. The exit was nowhere in sight. Darkness was everywhere it could possibly be. I reached for my gun, knowing full well there was no use in what I was about to do. The trigger gave way easily, and 9 shots rang out, just as I knew they would. What brief flashes of light they provided, none of it was any use. I couldn't see the back of its throat anymore, neither the walls nor the ceiling. My ears didn't hurt as much as they should. I wasn't in the bathroom anymore. The floor beneath my feet became wet, not with blood but saliva. Then it spoke again. In school, have they taught you of bounty hunters? The pinnacle of World War II, human nature laid bare at the height of the genocide of the Israelites. Some of them looked at their brethren, not with empathy, not with pity, not even with remorse, and as they gazed, they knew just how to survive. National Socialists allowed some of them to live and earn a considerable wage by pretending to be death camp runaways. They would arrive in a small town, looking disheveled, begging for shelter. Some of them have even starved themselves in preparation to appear more believable. They would often find shelter. No later than a week after, their guardian angels would be on a train, heading nowhere in particular. They survived the war, just as rats and roaches did. There is strength in filth. At this point, I've had enough. I keeled over and screamed. I couldn't understand what was happening and why. I was a broken man awaiting to be a corpse. Any man can be a rat. To be clean is a privilege, after all. What the hell do you want from me? Enough with this nonsense. Just kill me already, you piece of... Calm yourself. You are in polite company, after all. We would like you to testify against Bernard Hoffman, your former employer. Street name, Swab. Will you become a rat and live? There was once a man who prided himself on following the rules, never stepping on anyone's toes, and lacking in greed. The man applied these principles even in crime. One day he picked up his last package. The contents aren't important, even though it was what led to the man's death. He was a clean rat, and so could be eaten. His body would be later discovered with 9 gunshot wounds to the back of the head, in a dingy gas station bathroom an hour away from the border. It would be ruled a suicide. None of his family cared enough to contest, and so they lived. His killer, a being that shouldn't be, would write down the last of his thoughts and post them here. Story number 5. I woke up this morning tired, heavy, and strangely unhappy. No reason I could name. Then I noticed something clutched in my right hand. A plastic bag. Its handle bit into my fingers, damp with something sticky. A faint trail of red dripped onto the floorboards. My breath caught. I did not know how it got there. Maybe someone slipped it into my hand as a prank. Maybe not. Curiosity gnawed at me. I told myself I would only take a quick peek, then move on. But the moment I looked inside, a chill shot through me. I cannot tell you what I saw. Not because I do not want to, but because you might judge me. So I thought, maybe I could just leave it somewhere, dump it by the roadside, and let the utility crew deal with it. Problem solved, or so I told myself. I searched for an isolated spot, the perfect place to abandon my burden. My shoes left faint smears where the drops hit the pavement. I did not want it. I wanted it gone. I tucked it behind a bush, out of sight, hidden. But just as I turned to leave, a man appeared. His eyes locked on the plastic bag with disgust. "Isn't this yours?" he asked, voice sharp. No, of course not." I snapped back, guilt spilling through the cracks. "I saw you walking here with that bag. It is yours." His tone was pure accusation. His face twisted as he peeked inside. Then he lurched forward and vomited. "Neighbors, look, this man is dumping his filth." Disgusting. "A sinner," he shouted, pointing at me like I had been caught red-handed. I panicked. Instinct took over. I snatched the plastic bag and bolted. Drops of blood spattered the ground behind me, marking every step. My heart pounded, as if the sound itself were an alarm, screaming my guilt across the street. I did not look back. I did not want to hear another word from him, or see the disgust etched on his face. All I knew was I had to get away. The bag swinging at my side, binding me to it in ways I couldn't untangle. What's inside the bag? I won't tell. Not yet. Not anyone. Good thing I ran. If I had stayed, his voice would have drawn a crowd, and I would have been trapped. I kept moving, faster, until the street swallowed me whole. The bag swung at my side, light yet impossibly heavy. I thought I saw droplets falling from its corner, dark stains hitting the pavement. But when I turned to check, the street behind me was clean. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was leaving a trail, that someone could follow me, step by step, straight to the bag. I wanted to throw it away, drop it in the gutter, shove it into a trash bin, but my grip wouldn't release. My fingers locked tight, as if the bag had wound itself into my nerves. The guilt and fear that someone may recognize it. Again, it didn't feel like I was carrying it anymore. It felt like it was carrying me, somewhere deep inside. I knew this wasn't something I could simply discard. It had to be dealt with, carefully, properly. If I failed, it might return. I needed help, someone I could trust. So I went to my friends. I told them what I could, though not everything. I begged them to help me get rid of it, begged them to take it from me, if only for a moment. Their eyes shifted as I spoke. Some glanced at my hand, at the plastic glistening in the light, as if they saw what was seeping through. Others avoided looking at me entirely. No one answered. And in that silence, I understood. They weren't seeing me anymore. They were seeing the bag. Sadness pressed down on me. None of them could help. Their silence was louder than words. But maybe there was still one I could trust. A friend above all friends. I went to his place. The gate loomed in front of me, tall and closed. I stepped forward and knocked, the plastic bag still clutched in my hand. The gate creaked open. He appeared with a wide smile, arms outstretched. He pulled me into a hug, warm and unguarded. He was genuinely happy to see me. For a moment, I almost believed the bag was gone. As he hugged me, the plastic bag brushed against him. A faint smear of red marked his shirt where it touched. He pulled back, eyes narrowing. "What's that?" he asked. "This," I said, lifting the bag. My hand shook slightly, and I saw fresh drops of blood trail down the plastic. "This is why I came. I need your help to get rid of it." He leaned closer, squinting as if the bag itself were breathing. I held it tight, unwilling to let him see, but then I forced myself to trust. With trembling fingers, I loosened the knot and pulled it open just enough. The moment he saw inside, his face blanched. He staggered a step back, disgust twisting across his features. Then he turned away, almost violently, refusing to let me read his expression. He didn't want me to know what he saw. He leaned out, scanning the street to his left, though then to his right, as if making sure no one was watching. His voice dropped low. "Sorry, man. I can't help you." Before I could answer, he slipped back inside, and the gate clanged shut between us. The sound echoed in the empty street, final and absolute. What's inside the bag that makes them recoil, that turns friends into strangers? I won't tell. Not yet. Not anyone. I stood there, head down, and cried. Not loud, not wailing, just a slow collapse I couldn't stop. The gate was closed, the street empty, and the bag still hung heavy at my side. Their silence had been bad enough. His refusal cut deeper. I couldn't believe it. I had come clinging to the last thread of trust. And even that was gone. Now it was just me and the bag. I had to keep moving. My chest felt like stone. Each step dragged me deeper into the endless road. The bag swung at my side, its weight pulling harder. Fresh droplets streaked down its corner, pattering softly on the pavement. It was heavier now, not just in weight, but in meaning, as if it fed on the eyes that followed me. The whispers in my mind were louder than any sound outside. They think I did this. They think I killed. They think it's mine to bear. And with each thought, the guilt gnawed at me, sharp and unrelenting, eating me alive from the inside, twisting my stomach and clenching my chest. Houses blurred past. Faces flickered in windows, on porches, and behind curtains. Some eyes narrowed in disgust, others lingered with pity, and a few turned away too quickly, afraid of catching whatever curse I carried. Strangers crossed my path. At first they barely noticed me, but when their eyes fell on the bag, everything shifted. Mothers pulled children closer, whispering. Men stiffened, glancing at me and looking away. Teens froze, stared too long, then scattered. No one said a word, but I felt it. The thought hung in the air like a shadow. They saw me, and in their minds, I was something monstrous. I hadn't done it. I knew that. But every step, every look, every silence made me feel guilty anyway, as if the world itself was forcing me to confess. Then a woman appeared at her gate. Her eyes were wide and hard, filled with a rage I couldn't name. She shouted, "Stay away from us and take that filth somewhere else." A handful of dung clung to her fingers, a few stray droplets flicking toward me. They didn't hit me, but I could feel her accusation as if it were a tangible force. Her gaze didn't waver. She didn't see me as a person anymore. The thing inside the plastic bag made real guilt in her eyes. I ran. The street stretched endlessly, shadows whispering their verdict. The weight of their judgment pressed into me harder than the bag itself, gnawing at my gut, twisting my chest. Every step was a confession I hadn't made. Every heartbeat reminded me that I was misunderstood, hunted by my own guilt and by their imagined truth. How can I explain that I didn't commit this crime? No one wants to hear me. No one will listen. Fresh droplets of blood still fell from the plastic bag. I watched them, a mix of disgust, hatred, and hopelessness tightening in my chest. What's inside the bag? I'm sorry. I can't let you know. Not yet. Not anyone. I kept walking, letting my feet drag me forward, praying they would carry me to someone I could still trust. Then I reached a corner. My chest tightened. I broke into a near run, almost excited, almost afraid, as if the turn itself might hold an answer. I scanned the road. Left, right, everywhere, and there, on the left side, an elderly man moved with quiet grace. His steps were slow, unhurried, yet steady, as though the world couldn't shake him. Something about him pulled at me. He looked familiar. not just to my eyes, but to something deeper. For the first time in a long while, the weight on my hand felt a little less heavy. I moved toward him, slow steps, hesitant, afraid that even this moment might betray me. "Excuse me," I whispered, my voice almost breaking. The elderly man turned his head with deliberate care, his eyes meeting mine. For a heartbeat, the world fell silent, and then it hit me. Recognition, relief flooded through my chest. "Grandpa?" I breathed, the words slipping out like a long-locked secret, a release I didn't know I'd been holding. Tears slipped before I could stop them. Seeing him there, real, familiar, and safe, was like a crack of light in the dark. For the first time, I felt a fragile relief. Someone I could trust. A family. "What's wrong, son?" Grandpa's voice was gentle and steady, the kind that had soothed me once before. My hand trembled as I lifted the bag for him to see. The plastic crinkled, streaked with red. From a tiny tear at the bottom, fresh droplets slid down and pattered onto the ground between us. "I need help," I said, my voice breaking, almost crying. "I need help getting rid of this." Grandpa's eyes rested on me, gentle, filled with compassion that cut deeper than anger ever could. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I can't help you with that." The words shattered me. My chest caved in, and my throat burned. My last thread of hope snapped, and I felt hollow. I wanted to scream, to tear the air apart, but all I could do was collapse to my knees, sobs breaking loose like a dam. The bag thudded to the ground beside me, leaking steadily, each drop marking my defeat. Grandpa didn't flinch. He just stood there, watching me with that same calm, unshaken gentleness, as if he could see through the mess of me and still choose to love me anyway. Then, after what felt like forever, his voice came again, quiet but steady. "But I know someone who can help you." For a moment, relief washed over me, a spark of hope. I held on to it as I walked toward the house Grandpa had pointed me to, gripping it like a fragile thread. Each step felt uncertain, my chest tightening with the thought, what if they turned me away too? What if this hope was just another cruel trick? The house stood waiting at the end of the path, modest, yet quietly elegant, as if it carried dignity without needing to boast. I hesitated, then lifted my hand and knocked on the door. The door creaked open. A couple stood before me, warm smiles lighting their faces. For a second, their kindness almost disarmed me. I lowered my eyes, suddenly shy under their gaze. Grandpa told me to come here for help. Their smiles faltered. They glanced at each other, confusion flickering between them, as though they weren't sure what I meant, or whether they wanted to know. This is where they'll reject me, I thought. My hand trembled as I raised the plastic bag, blood dripping steadily from its corner. I kept my head low. "Because of this," I whispered, bracing myself for the sting of their rejection. Silence, stretched, heavy, and suffocating. I didn't need to wait for their words. I already knew. I'd been through this before. I turned slightly, ready to step back into the night, ready to carry the weight alone again. Then, softly but firmly, a voice cut through. "Come inside." I stepped inside. For a moment, it felt like someone was finally ready to listen. Or maybe I was fooling myself, walking straight into another silence, another rejection dressed as kindness. But Grandpa had said they could help me. So maybe I'd give them the benefit of the doubt. Deep down, I wanted to believe it. I wanted to believe they might actually help me this time. For real. But part of me whispered it could just be another false hope waiting to collapse. "Sit here," they said, motioning me toward a chair by the table. "Tell us everything." Their voices were calm, steady, and almost too gentle. I hesitated, words catching in my throat, but they leaned closer, their eyes holding mine. There was no judgment there, at least not yet. Just patience, assurance, a quiet promise that maybe this time I could trust. And I told them everything. From the moment I woke, with the bag in my hand, to the stairs, the refusals and the shame that led me here. At first my words stumbled, hesitant and broken, but as their silence held steady, something shifted. Slowly, they gained my trust, and I let it all out. When I was done, the room was quiet. Then one of them finally spoke. "Let's go," they said. "We'll help you dispose of it." My head raised with hope. "We know a place," the couple said. We carried our tools, shovels mostly, the kind meant for digging, for burying. The couple led me to the place they had chosen, an empty field, ringed by rusted iron wire, its edges swallowed by waist-high grass swaying in the wind. The road ran close beside it, not hidden, not secret, just an exposed stretch of land where anyone passing by could see. The thought unsettled me. My chest tightened at the risk, but I followed anyway, because the couple walked with a calm certainty. They moved as though they knew what they were doing, as though I could finally trust someone to help me carry this burden. We have arrived at the place. We dug into the earth as if we were preparing a grave. The hole widened and deepened, its shape eerily like the ones I had seen at funerals. Each shovelful of soil felt heavier than it should have, as though the ground itself resisted. While we worked, footsteps echoed along the roadside. A passerby, my pulse spiked, panic clawing up my throat. I froze, shovel in hand, praying they would keep walking, that their eyes would not fall on me, or the bag, but the couple didn't hide. They lifted their heads and smiled. "How are you doing?" the man called out warmly, as if this were nothing more than tending a garden. The passerby slowed, curiosity in their voice. "Hey, what are you doing there?" My stomach dropped. The fear that had followed me all this way surged again. I wanted to vanish. "Nah, we're just helping this poor man," the husband replied easily, his tone light, almost casual. The words hung in the air, strangely comforting. For once I wasn't alone. The passerby's gaze flicked to the hole, then to me, then to the bag. My breath locked in my chest, waiting for the judgment, the accusation, and the shout that always came. Instead, he only nodded. "All right, just take care out here. Those tools are sharp." And then he walked on, unbothered, his footsteps fading into the road's hum. I stood there, stunned, shovel trembling in my hands. I couldn't believe what I had just witnessed. No disgust, no suspicion, just normal. It wasn't me he trusted, it was them, the couple. Their presence made the bag invisible, and made me invisible. For the first time, I felt the shield of someone else's trust, but we weren't done. Together we continued to dig deeper. We kept digging, the shovels biting deeper into the earth until the hole sank 6 feet down. When I finally stood at its edge and looked in, it felt bottomless, like it could swallow everything I carried inside me. For the first time in a long while, I felt a flicker of hope, maybe even redemption. This hole wasn't just for the bag. It was for the weight I had been dragging all this time. The couple smiled gently, their eyes steady on mine. With a small nod, they signaled for me to let go. I looked down at the plastic bag. It sagged with its hideous weight. The thin film stretched and stained dark, glistening in the dim light. Fresh streaks of blood still slipped from a tear at the bottom, dripping slow and deliberate into the dirt. The sight of it made my stomach turn. It reeked of everything I hated, everything I wanted gone. Without hesitation, I hurled the bag into the hole. It landed with a sickening splatter, blood spraying against the raw earth. The plastic tore open on impact, and the thing inside spilled out, twisted and exposed, glistening in the shallow light. The sight clawed at me, forcing bile to rise in my throat. After I did that, I felt lighter. The crushing weight I had carried for so long was gone. My chest loosened, my steps steadied, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe. The heaviness had bled out with the bag, leaving me hollow, yet strangely free. We exchanged glances, unspoken but steady, and began covering the hole with mud and earth. Shovel after shovel, the grave slowly disappeared beneath the soil. When the mound had risen about 2 feet, the ground shifted in a strange, quiet way. Then, without warning, water began to rise from beneath, clear and pure, bubbling up as though the earth itself had decided to open a vein. It filled the bottom of the hole and kept rising until it stood 2 feet high, calm and glimmering, turning what looked like a grave into a pool of crystal. We stood in awe, watching the water shimmer in the hole. Then our eyes met, and we shared quiet smiles, as if the sight itself was a sign of success. Without wasting time, we continued shoveling, layering the earth back into the grave until only the last 2 feet remained. With one final effort, I hurled the last clump of soil in. A wave of relief swept through me. The weight, the shame, the burden, it was gone. At last, I am free. I stepped back, putting 3 meters between myself and the hole, while the couple stayed behind, pressing the earth flat, sealing it for good. I turned my back to the grave and lifted my gaze toward the sky. The heavens stretched wide and bright, their beauty almost unreal. A weightless feeling washed over me, as though I were finally unchained. I closed my eyes, lifted my hands, and let the sunlight pour over my face. For the first time in so long, I felt alive. By the way, you've been wondering what was inside the plastic bag, haven't you? It was the chopped remains of someone I once loved. Story number 6. The first thing everyone needs to know is that my therapist is the only reason I'm doing this. Having a diagnosis for clinical depression means you get a therapist. It wasn't like I could afford it. I'd just gotten laid off, so when I found a job listing on LinkedIn for a night guard position at a mall, I took it, totally not like I was forced to. Thanks, Dr. Carter. I needed a reason to get out of bed every day anyway, and I was a night owl as well. I got hired without an interview, which told me that they were desperate, and pulled up at around noon. Strangely, there was no one in the parking lot. It was fairly out in the sticks, too, 20 or so miles out of the city. Nothing else was around. No buildings, just trees and a road. What was even stranger was the guy who was to be my boss. An old man he was, with heavy bags under his eyes, which were bug-like and dark. His shoulders were slumped down, like he had held the weight of the world and crumbled. He was holding a belt and a clear plastic bag with a uniform. Looked to be around my size, like a Paul Blart Light. His voice was also strange, like a stone dragging against steel. "Hey there, are you Anderson?" His eyes bored into mine as he asked the question, like he was trying to stare right into my soul. It felt like he was succeeding. "Yeah, you, Brandon." He nodded in response and grunted as he turned toward the towering building. Now that I was really looking at the mall itself, it looked strange, like a mix of different architectural styles. I recognized a few of them. Gothic, a few Athenian pillars were arranged out front. The 4th floor was a weird Roman style. There was a kind of Persian dome on the top. I assumed from the look of it, it was made of stained glass. Brandon groped for a ring of keys on his belt, arthritic fingers bulging slightly, and unlocked the front door. Why was the main door of a mall locked at noon on a Tuesday? So are there any other guards? Brandon peered over his ice slope of a shoulder, his eyes fixed on mine, as he answered bluntly, "No." That was somehow not as strange as I thought it would be. "Why not?" He pushed the door open and held it for me before bustling ahead like a stick bug. "Only need one." I didn't mind the short answers. I wasn't in the mood to talk much anyway. I kept masking, something Dr. Carter told me to stop doing. The guard office was on the second floor. It was a small room. There was a mini fridge, a coffee brewer, a leather sofa, a desk with many monitors on it, complete with a chair that swivels, and a sun-bleached poster of a cat that said, "Hang in there." Brandon tossed the uniform at me, along with a belt and key ring. "Stay here till I get back. Until then, do not turn on the monitors. Just change into the uniform." I raised my eyebrow at him and he shrugged me off, walking out of the office after checking the room for cameras all around the room, to the point of sticking my fingers in the slits of the vent in the room. I changed as quickly as possible. I still felt like something was right behind me, watching me. Didn't have a radio, and there wasn't any kind of pepper spray, but there was a small cross embroidered on the inside of the collar. I pulled my wallet, phone, and small baggie of pills from my pockets. Downside, it was not socially acceptable to have a purse, and I was too lazy to deal with a bag anyway, so I usually kept my antidepressants in a baggie. Felt a bit rebellious to keep it in a way that felt nefarious, one of the few things that wasn't drowned in the sea of depression. Right as I popped a pill, Brandon came back in carrying another key ring. He stared as the bag disappeared into my pocket. "Those illicit?" His voice sounded both apprehensive and slightly hopeful. "Nope, antidepressants." He grunted again before tossing me the key ring he had. I looked down at it. There were tags attached to the keys. B4, B5, and B6, all the way till B9, and a couple that said maintenance, bathrooms, and emergency. The emergency tag was bright red with yellow lettering. The keyring I just gave you has keys to the elevators, employee bathrooms, and the 5 maintenance rooms across the buildings. All the maintenance rooms have breaker boxes that control the section's lights and appliances, as well as valves to the fire sprinkler system and the ventilation system. All the systems are closed off in case of failure. The emergency key goes into a lock at the end of the hallway on the 9th subfloor. Only use it for emergencies, life or death situations. The key ring I gave you at the entrance to the building has keys to all the other doors around the building. He showed me around the building. The 3 food courts, the departments, the empty slots that were filled with couches and tables, and where the vending machine with the best snacks is, all with the exception of the subfloors. Gave him the heebie-jeebies, he said. Strange coming from such a gruff man. When we were walking through the last food court, there was a sudden screeching coming from the sandwich place. It was sharp and piercing, like the wail of a woman pitched upward until it was a continuous needle in my ears. There were crashes and additional screams coming from the kitchen behind it. When it stopped, I realized that Brandon was walking toward me from the little place. There was peanut butter on his sleeve. On our way out, he showed me one of the maintenance rooms. Remember, in case something happens or something fails, you'll have 4 other sectors where there's power and running water. Sometimes things make their way into the air vents, and you'll have to clear them. So you'll just hit these 2 buttons here and twist this knob. He showed me how to clear the vents. When he did it, there was a thunderous thumping coming from the inside, which slowly got quieter. He also showed me how to read the gauges to tell how close the breakers were to failing. There are some things you'll want to see, so keep the lights on, but there are also things you might not want to see. In that case, turn as many lights off as you can. In the event the breakers in the section you're in flip and the lights go out, be careful. The things you don't want to see won't get at you, but the things you'd want to see will. Those can and will. I did not like that warning. He was an old man, so it was possible that he was just being senile, but the fact that he appeared completely serious and present in the moment unnerved me. On the way to the elevator that went to the subfloors, there was a faint pattering. All of a sudden, Brandon covered my eyes with his swollen fingers. reaching for a nearby switch that plunged us into absolute darkness. What the? I started out before it was bit off by Brandon clamping his hand tighter over my mouth. His raspy voice found its whispered way to my ear. Don't move, don't acknowledge. The moment the words left his lips, I felt something behind me. I could hear the meaty slap of bare flesh against the smooth concrete. I felt warm breath on my neck, but as I made to turn, I felt Brandon grip my arms tight. Relenting, I stayed in place for what felt like an agonizingly long time. When we heard the scuttling fade away, the lights snapped back on, blinding me. When you hear something like that running at you, you turn off the light if you can. If you can't, cover your eyes, curl up, and don't move. Understand? I reluctantly nodded, letting the questions and accusations die in my dry throat. We walked from the hallway to the front doors. The elevator was forgotten. See you Thursday, right? That's when my first shift is. He stared at me. Yep, it'll be a kind of evaluation. When your shift is over, I'll come to check it out. And if you pass, you'll start seeing more shifts. Lucky for you, since you're the only other employee. You'll be getting around 50 an hour, and with 7 p.m. to 4 a.m. shifts every day of the work week. You'll be raking in the money. He smiled at me, showing tea-stained teeth. If I didn't know him any better, I'd say he was a Brit. As I was leaving, he called out. When I turned, he adopted the air of a grave man, somehow more grave than he was in the maintenance room. And boy, when you get here on Thursday, check the underside of the desk. There'll be something there that'll be useful for you. With that, I hopped into my car and planned to get up early tomorrow, even though I knew that I'd only end up getting out of bed at noon. Contemplating everything that happened today. Damn it, I thought as I drove away. Dr. Carter isn't going to like this. You've reached the end, but the shadows haven't left you. If this story unsettled you, prove you survived. Like this video, subscribe to Spectral Shadows, and leave a comment with the part that haunted you most. The darkness is always waiting, and so are we. Until next time, don't turn off the lights.